According to yesterday's copy of THISDAY newspapers, there is an increasing likelihood that the first ballot at the February 25 presidential election may not produce a clear winner. By implication, there may be a runoff in the presidential contest before a clear winner is returned by the Independent National Electoral Commission. Although, with the current standing, the presidential candidate of People's Democratic Party, Atiku Abubakar, can still boast 23 states where he's likely to get 25%, while his All Progressives Congress rival Bola Tinubu is confident of 20 states where he can also pull his weight. The candidates of Labour Party, Peter Obi, and New Nigeria People's Party, Rabiu Kwankwaso, follow as third and fourth in that order, will fall far short in many states to satisfy the constitutional requirement of 25% of votes cast in 24 states. This latest development follows a recent THISDAY poll, The Explainer, released by the THISDAY 2023 Election Center projections, where a breakdown of new realities is advanced with implications for each candidate. Joining us on the morning show to break down the projections by THISDAY is Dr. Sam Amadi, Arise News analyst, and Professor Anthony Kila, director at Center for International Advanced and Professional Studies and author of the book, Epistles of Anthony Kila, Reflections on Nigeria. Welcome to the morning show, Professor Kila and Dr. Sam Amadi. Good to see you.
Good morning, good to be here.
Okay, gentlemen, let's start with the basics to try to lay the foundation for the discussion. Now, this is the political season, and increasingly we are having groups coming up with polls, newspapers coming up with projections. In fact, even prophets are already prophesying. I saw one analysis, projections by Primate Ayodele of the Evangelica. Of what value are these polls, projections, assumptions, and of what effect could they possibly have on the outcome of the election with regard to accuracy? Let's look at that basic concept first before we now go to the THISDAY projections. Let me start with you, Professor Kila, and then we'll take Dr. Amadi's views also.
Well, I think polls generally are good tools to gauge the pulse of the nation. It's a pity that we tend to do it in Nigeria just for election. Generally, you know, in any society that is data-led, polls are things you do continuously to test popularity of people, government policies, programs, and ideas, and even effect, consequences of policies on the nation. So polls are always welcomed. I think the effect of the poll is overrated for what people think, because most voters tend to have made up their mind way before now. There's a bracket of just about 25% of voters who tend to make up their mind in a very rational way towards the election. Those voters are swayed, perhaps because of what we call a big event, something unexpected that comes up. It could be positive or it could be negative, you know. Those people who believe in truth and integrity will change their mind if it comes out that the candidate or party they're supporting is a blatant liar. You know, people who believe in competence will perhaps change their mind if they discover that the candidate they were voting against turns out to be very competent, perhaps in a debate, in a town hall meeting, or in an investigation. But generally, people have made up their mind. So there's a bracket. Within that 25% of bracket, experiences show us, there's a very small percentage, about 5 to 8% of people who really sit down to look at all the conditions and then make up their mind. Some optimists, some of my colleagues who are optimists, will call it up to 10%, who would say, I'm going to vote left or right because if I vote one way, that might be a waste of vote. So let me tactically go to one side. But, you know, intrinsically, human beings are not as rational as we make them from economics to politics. It tends to be more sort of a gut, emotional, and head following. But to your question, I think polls are important and they should be encouraged, and, you know, rather than discard them. And I think politicians do a natural thing, which is common of them, to discard polls that do not favor them. I think we should just ignore such feeling and insist on the accuracy of the polls. And I want our viewers to ask themselves a question, regardless of who they support. When they see polls, based on their own perception, do they think it's true or false? That's the first test. The second test is to take a closer look at the polls to test for their accuracy. So, for example, when you do polls in Nigeria, like everywhere in the world, you ask yourself that these polls, the people they asked, are they voters or people who are just going to stay at home and express their minds? Then you want to test the sort of the method used for the polls. Are we testing the people in rural areas who are not online on social media, or are we basing it on just people who reach on the telephone and on social media? Those are the factors that I think are more fascinating about the polls. And our viewers should know one thing as well. Contrary to what politicians say publicly, they have internal polls as well. You know, they gauge situations to see where they're strong. So this is a case of what happened before the reform in the church, where the Bible, i.e. the poll in this case, was accessible only to the priest, in this case to politicians. And now in modern times, the poll is being open to everybody as well to look at.
Well, Dr. Amadi, the value of polls and projections and assumptions about general election with specific reference to Nigeria.
Okay, let's start. I agree with Prof, my friend Kila, that polls are very important, especially for politicians who use polls to gauge how they are doing, especially run down to end of campaign. You'll be doing more of figures, numbers, looking at demographs. If the polls are sometimes disaggregated, like in the US, you can do polls of favorability rating, preference, issues that candidates, electorates care about. So that will help campaigns, design messaging to deal with those kind of issues that the polls trigger. For example, some polls can look at, tells you that, look, you are dealing with favorability problem, even though you are good on issues. So, for example, a ruling party that is sitting over bad economy, their own fault or not their fault, it doesn't count, would know that they're going to have problem in terms of if voters are going to reflect more on the economic side of things, then they're going to be more in trouble. If voters are more concerned, for example, with identity issues, whether it is religion, ethnicity, or inclusion, then they know how to craft their intervention. If voters are more worried about insecurity, so the question will now be, what kind of profile do we need to put across of our candidate to show that he can do the job better? Or what kind of antecedent history are we going to talk about? Or what kind of framing of our message? So very important. And like he said, the parties are doing their polls. They're not making it public because sometimes the numbers are not very encouraging for them. But again, beyond that is the idea that, look, we've seen the masters of this trade, people like Nat Silva, often get it wrong. And get it wrong might be because of several factors. One of them is presumptions. Professor Tetlock did a great book classic called Political Judgment. And the idea is that oftentimes we make mistakes because we consider too much rationality. They look at voters as rational persons, especially in more developed economies where there are less cultural constraint to choice and decision making. So we project, and then probably we miss out that voters, like every other person, it has embedded rationality, and that perception, optics, that can change in 2-3 days and hours, if you like, can trigger a disproportionate impact in terms of voter response. But again, also, oftentimes, we miss out these numbers because also voters are probably less communicative. They hide their preferences, or they mistake their preferences, or basically say they won't explain. And that's why the undecided keep rising. So that's when you talk about empirical polls. Dick Morris, who was Obama's pollster, he cleared his book, Oval Office. He says, look, each time, whether it's 1,000 sample size or 3,000 or 4,000, we have the same number of accuracy. He says, look, once I take out phone numbers from a public phone book, and it's methodical, it's systematic and consistent, a 1,000 sample is as credible as a 10,000 sample. And that's why if you look at annual poll, NOI, which has been very consistent and with some level of credibility, the sample size did 1,000, did 3,000, and their chief said, look, it remained the same. So the sample size might not be very important in the science of polling, but what matters is how you define the samples, the demographics, and how you're representative of maybe ethnicity, gender, and other socioeconomic profiling that's captured in that sample size. So in Nigeria, polls tell us a lot about voter behavior on the day of voting. They would do, and I looked at the previous NOI polls on 2015, 2011, 2019. They got it right. They didn't get to two-horse race, so they didn't get to number of votes A will win over B, and it's simpler. But with a four-horse race, if you like, or a three-horse race, depending on how you look at it, then the nuances not matter. And that's why the THISDAY projection, and they didn't say it's based on telephone or anything, but again, based on analytics, based on conceptual ideas around party dynamics, around social infrastructure, who can mobilize people, how are the governors moving, how are the major political actors shaping up. And so they made educated, reasonable, and I think the explainers make sense. But then you're going to look at the numbers. So if somebody has 20% and they have 15, 20% undecided, even if all the analytics are correct and hold, it means that in 2-3 days, you could see the whole electoral map change radically in terms of who gets 25%. And then you're going to go into a runoff. And then we've not even seen also the numbers in terms of actual majority. Our voting, our constitutional framework for winning is such that if everybody didn't get 2/3 of the required spread, then majority votes step in. So the guy who had 23, and the guy who had 20, and the guy who had 18, the guy who had 18, if he scores the highest number of votes, depending on where the votes are, and depending on the gap in which he's winning his area or the area where he has the spread, might be the one who enters into the last straw vote. So primarily, we should trust polls when the methodology are set out clear, because they tell us over time they have a level of consistency with margin of error. But beyond all that, we should also understand that it's based on certain conceptual construct about how people behave that in our own culture may not pan out that way. And of course, several dynamics might be overlooked or may be exaggerated or under-explained, in which case we've seen that happen with Trump victory in 2016 when at Silva, all the big guys who made the call got it wrong. And they said, look, we got it wrong because of this. We didn't see the black swan in the room, and he came and disarrayed all our permutation and analytics. So that's the way it works. But we should take polls, especially when they are empirical polls, very seriously, because sample size doesn't matter. They usually get it right.
All right, thank you, Dr. Sam Amadi. As expected, the THISDAY projections has elicited various reactions from the political parties in view. Indeed, the Labour Party have come out to say that they don't believe that they are non-existent, as this projection states, in some northwest and northeast states, whilst the PDP, with Atiku Abubakar being their frontliner, has said that they're going to win it with the first ballot and they're not even going to go to a runoff. I'm just looking at some of the results or the outcomes of these projections. I'd like to hear your take on the responses from these parties. They've also talked about the fact that perhaps giving Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu some figures in the southeast and southwest, southeast in particular, southeast and south is quite generous. And just to understand really in terms of, yes, we see that in southeast, Tinubu has 10%, in Enugu 10, 15, 15, 10. They're saying they're not quite as optimistic as this projection state. I'd like to hear from you, Mr. Sam Amadi, and of course, Professor Kila, on their responses to the projections.
Well, for me, I think the parties have responded as we should expect. The PDP candidate and his campaign team will look at the THISDAY projection and say, look, 23%, 23 states, we just need 2 more. And look, you guys discounted us so much in the Southeast, we think we can be more competitive. We actually think that maybe we can actually, those states where we have 20, 10, 15, we're going to do more. And they are legitimate to think that way because, look, like it's a projection, several factors. For example, if somebody says the factor of incumbency in, let's say, Imo State, APC, would give PDP, APC 10%, and the factor of Obi movement in Southeast would probably give Labour 60. A PDP campaign team can say, look closer. As you see, we have these stalwarts, we have this spread, we have two senators out of 3 or 1 out of 3. We have House of Reps members, X number, House of Assembly members. Look, this is about politics. This is about getting the votes out. We will get it done there. And therefore, we think that we're going to do 25 in Imo. This is just an example. Or we think that we'll do 25 in Cross River as part of Wike's or as part of APC's governor and as part of Obi's movement. Those are legitimate issues they raise. And so if they get that calculation, they will say, we're going to win on the first count. And of course, everybody is discounting who wins the majority vote. The assumption is that only one person would win two-thirds, and that one person will probably have the simple majority. Okay. Now, Labour can argue very well. So look, you have basically 20% in Kaduna. That's not correct. Of course, there's over 15 or 20% undecided there. We can tell you we can get 30, we can get 40, we can get 25. So they can actually reckon themselves that there are 3-4 states where they can say that we are sure of 25. They can argue that a state like Adamawa, where they're giving 10, some of them, Labour people have said, oh, Adamawa, the Christians, they will have a chunk of vote to take from Atiku's place. We can get 25. Those are reasonable projects. So not a bad idea to dispute those figures and the analytics that THISDAY use and the scoring. But what would be wrong, I think, is to say this is fraudulent, this is scam, this doesn't make sense. It makes sense in the logic of analytics and projections. But you can't, it's a projection, so you can have a counter projection based on analytics. So what I would do if I'm looking at this is say, look, this is wrong in these states, we're going to win. I give another example, Taraba. Maybe they're going to go 25%. Maybe they get more than that. Maybe they can actually fend off one of the contenders and they won't get 25. Lagos, Labour can argue clearly, say, look, this Lagos, we are going to get more than you gave us. So we're going to have dispute around these projections. But I heard P2B somewhere, I think on television, make the point, a present point, that this is not, he says it's a projection. THISDAY did not say that they interview people. So we take it as projection. They are largely right in the factors they are considering. So that's a responsible response to say, look, yes, this is what it is. This is their projection and perception. But for us, these are the numbers we're working on. And we have done our own polls, or we're relying on these other 3 polls that gave us the lead. And we're going to now go and fix these 6 areas and show that we are stronger than these editors or our explainers have captured. All these responses are good. What is not responsible is to throw it away and don't look at underneath the narrative that tells you how you should rejig and re-strategize their campaign to move away or counteract or mine those factors that this explanation says are having implication for the race in these states for each of the parties. So reasonable response from PDP, reasonable response from Labour, but what matters is now how you analyze this and take it to redesign your strategy and your tactical engagement on ground.
All right, so analysis, strategy for political parties. Professor Kila, your take on the responses thus far from the political parties?
Well, I think my take on the response of political parties is this. The viewers should be warned, and we should always remember that when politicians speak in public, they rarely speak to inform or to analyze or to deliberate in public. They tend to speak to persuade at all times, and what they like is what favors their intention to win. What they don't like is anything that is against their desire to win, regardless of whether it is true, objective, good or bad. Politicians are very self-centered and they just focused on winning. So that is all what they want to hear. We must say very clearly here that, yes, polls get it wrong sometimes. But please let me assure all our viewers that most times, save for the case of outright fraud, most times in history of humanity, polls get it right. And it is important to say this because it's the celebration of science, the celebration of knowledge, that you can predict what millions of people are going to do by sampling just a few thousands of them. It's something that we should cherish and enjoy. It's something that is great. We should not let politicians, because of their own desire, their momentary desire, destroy science. The reason why we have this kind of conversation here is because partisan politics in Nigeria has no sense of institution. It has no respect of what is sacred, and it has no regard for facts. Everybody is a cheap sophist when it comes to partisan politics in this country, and people just, anything goes. People talk as if there's no history, as if there's no logic. What matters is winning. So here's my take. I think, and by the way, it is important for people to note this, that when politicians react, rarely do you get a politician to say, I think you've given us more votes, too much votes in that state or in that region. They always complain to say you didn't give them enough. They don't come back to say, oh no, I don't think we can get 80% in Adamawa or something. They will take that quietly, then they'll complain about where they don't get enough votes. So I think viewers and citizens in general need to analyze things themselves. For the places where it appears the Labour Party's candidate, Peter Obi, is getting nil, I want viewers to understand that it doesn't mean he's getting 0 votes. It simply means that the number of votes there are not high enough to be represented in clear percentages. And it is important to also note that in those places, the undecided votes should be looked at. There's a part in which politicians don't talk about in polls, and it is the quantity of undecided polls, or undecided voters, because that matters a lot. It matters because in some regions, people are not saying it because genuinely they've not made up their mind. In other places, they're not saying it because they don't want people to know who they're going to vote for. Those are the two cases. I argue that it is rare to find somebody living in Nigeria now that has no idea of who they're going to vote for. The only reason why people can be undecided is perhaps the people they normally tend to vote for are not convincing enough for them. So maybe you're a natural APC voter, but you're not happy with the APC's performing. Then you tend to be undecided. Maybe you're a natural PDP voter, but you're not happy with the candidate. Then you might be undecided. Maybe you're looking at this new phenomenon called Peter Obi, but you're not sure yet. You're gauging to see if this is a fluke, if it's just noise, or if it's just substance. Those are the reasons why people are undecided. So I think somehow we need to arrogate ourselves some kind of arrogance and ignore politicians and speak to people who are objective, who are general stakeholders when it comes to polls, not partisan stakeholders like politicians.
Okay, I'll start with you, Professor Kila, then I'll go to Dr. Sam Amadi. Let's talk about this silent majority, as they were called in the time of Trump. These people, a lot of people don't talk about. The undecided people. The people that this projection say they're about 40%, which makes a large bulk. Can we go into the degree of rationality or irrationality? Are we going to have phenomenons like the Reagan Democrats, a bunch of Democrats that voted for Reagan, which was a Republican? Are we going to have those phenomenons and those variations in the silent majority? Professor Kila, I'll come to you first. And Dr. Amadi, I'll come to you. And happy Christmas and a prosperous New Year to both of you once again. Those are my wishes from my heart to both of you. Professor Kila, you first.
Thank you very much. You have a good heart. Yes, thank you very much. So here's the thing. Thank you very much for bringing the Reagan Democrats. And it will be said that, a couple of decades later, Barack Obama talked about Obamacans at some point where he thought it was necessary to go and pull out Republicans that would vote for him. And it did work. Mind you, some Republicans voted for Obama, especially their children, who sort of forced them to do it. We are in a situation now that is very new in the history of our politics. i.e. a situation of uncertainty and a situation where we truly have possible three-way votes. That is the reality. The nearest we got to this before in the history of Nigeria, and I mean since we've been voting from the First Republic to now, since the 50s up to today, was what happened around 1979 and 1983, where we had the NPN as a major party, the UPN, and followed somewhat by the NPP. You know, those who have read history of holding off will remember this party, Nigerian People's Party, Unity Party of Nigeria, and the National Party of Nigeria. Since 1999, we've been used to actually not just wondering who is going to win. It was clear. Because let's face it, up till 2015, the only national party in the country was actually the PDP. The other parties were mostly regional, you know, the other way. Be it ABGA, be it AD, be it ACN. They didn't really have a big national spread like the PDP had. So their path to power was pretty clear. It was in 2015 that for the first time, we had two national parties with equal spread contending issues. So it was easy to decide and it was easy to foresee where we're going to. Fast forward to 2023, we're in 2022, moving towards 2023 now. We have two major issues at stake. Number one is the fact that for the first time in the history of Nigeria, we've actually tried two different sides. We ejected the ruling party, brought in an opposition party. Now, I am sure, and you know, those who know my history will know that I was one of those who actively campaigned for the APC, at least in 2015. Now, I'm sure that the most loyal voter, citizen of the APC, in their conscience, not in public, in their heart of heart, will know the APC has not done the wonder that was promised when they were formed and they came to power. You know, there might be lots of reasons. The virus, bad luck, anything, for various reasons. But the fact is, let us leave the why. Let's go to the what. The fact is that the imagined wonder that people were waiting for, the big transformation that people were waiting for, has not happened. You can judge it by the cost of food, by the availability of jobs, by the tendency of people to leave the country rather than come back. That magic has not happened. So it's a big burden on people who are inclined for the APC, who are against the PDP. The PDP, some people miss them, but people have seen exactly that. Neither the PDP is this grand Eldorado we're talking about. And there's this Labour Party coming up, which people are not sure of. I think the Labour Party goes beyond, and you know, and it is important here to distinguish between obedience and obicracy. Obicracy is the management of obedience. Obedience is the passion of people following Obi, and Obi is the candidate himself. And I think the obicracy itself has failed in some areas. The ability to really manage this big passion from movement to party. You know, there's some glaring flaws there. All these things put together, disappointment in the ruling party, if you want, the lukewarmness towards the main opposition party, and the uncertainty of the new thing on the horizon, creates a big bulk of voters who you are referring to as the silent one, the undecided one. These are people who are looking at it. And if you're going to look at those people, they tend to be older than 35 years old from the demographic I have seen. These are people who have seen a bit, not seen it all. They think they've seen it all, but they haven't seen it all. They've seen a bit of everything, and they're not really feeling this fire that will make them jump up and down for one side. They're looking at it gradually and saying, look, this thing doesn't look well. They're looking at the process of primaries on all the sides. They're looking at declaration of candidates, and they're saying, is this a brighter future indeed? Those are the people looking at the fundamentals. Those are the people looking at the economy, looking at the debt in which we are, and thinking, these people do not seem serious. They do not seem to be coming up with, you know, mind-blowing big policies to say this is what we're going to do about it. Up till now, you know, this is good seasons, we wish well. Up till now, we've not had debate about who's going to privatize, who's going to leave it to the state. We're not having debate about who's going to cut tax, who's going to increase it. And people who are leading the real life, you know, people who are earning salary, paying tax, living from what they earn, not magic, not gift, not miracles, not connection, people who are really waking up every morning to do their jobs, those people understand the dynamics, whether you're selling food by the roadside or you're building something in a factory. If all you live by is what you earn, you'll understand the dynamics of governance and political economy more than any doctor in a classroom. Those people are looking at it and they're not persuaded, they're not reassured. There is no Messiah on the horizon for thinking people. People realize that we need to get little things right. And that, to your question, is the origin of that bulk of undecided voters. Because they're not persuaded that these people have come out, that most of the candidates have come out of pure merit. It's a lot of arrangement, compromise, threats, and, you know, just magical things coming out. The silent voters are not looking for a leader or Messiah. They're looking for a CEO. And when they look on the horizon, they are wondering, can this person be CEO? Especially because the CEO Nigeria is going to elect is not just a CEO. We're electing a CEO and chairman of board of directors. If Nigeria were a corporate organization, that's a lot of power, that's a lot of responsibility. So they're not easily excited, to answer your question. And because we have technology at hand, never in the history of humanity has information been so available. Because it is easy to turn on your TV, switch on your computer, actually your telephone, not even your computer, and see what's going on in the rest of the world, and see the kind of debate people are having. We are talking here in this country at the moment about some people who live in the same country, traveling together to another country to go and make a decision about the country they live and they left. In the hours in which we're talking about that, you switch to another news channel or you read another page and you're seeing an Austrian astronaut that is jumping from space. And you just realize that there's little to be excited about here. So it is easy to be part of those voters. And I do think, and this goes beyond partisan politics, it is leadership that goes beyond politics, that extend from media to classrooms, to community, to churches and mosques. We need to go and interrogate those silent voters and engage them and make them loud. History tells us one thing. Those people you call silent majority, wait, they are silent majority, not just because you call them so. Anytime there's a radical change in the system, it is when the voice of the silent majority is heard. And I think we need to take it serious. And 40% is a lot. It's a lot in a country where most voters vote.
Okay, Dr. Amadi, I'd like you to come in here.
Yeah, I think maybe I disagree a little bit with Prof to say that I don't think really that undecided is 40%. Okay, now who are undecided voters? Oftentimes we conflate two things. We conflate voters who don't want to express their preference and voters who probably have not decided. Now, undecided voters are typically voters who are rational enough and they are trying to process based on indicators, economic policy, candidates, issues on the table. So they say, well, this guy looks good to me, but look, he has got this issue. I'm weighing how this issue damages his candidature. I'm also likening candidate B, but it seems to me that I don't like his party, or I'm struggling to understand why he's focusing on this policy. Now, this kind of rational thinking that go into, it doesn't have to be professors, but basically voters who have been emancipated largely from being embedded in social network, whether in terms of ethnic bias, religious bias, or groupthink. I mean, look at Trump once said that among his supporters, even if he killed somebody on the 4th Avenue or the 5th Avenue in New York, that it won't have any impact on the polls in terms of his supporters. They are supporting him because they have identified a closed system. They are fighting against what they think is the evil effect of globalization. They want to recreate their country in their own image, and this is the champion. So those voters are, trapped. So in my own schema, I have three kinds of voters. I have the captive voters, most of our mothers in the rural area, persons who are patron-client relationship define their voting behavior. They simply know that Chief Amadi says we should vote for A. Chief Amadi moves to Party B. They follow Chief Amadi to Party B because Chief Amadi has been servicing that clientelist network for 4 years, and that is the time for them to pay back. Those are entrapped voters. Those are the ones that the party big shots bank on. We have our voters. We have our structure in the villages and rural areas. There's also the emancipated voter, the young middle class professionals, graduates, angry, worried about their future. They are not embedded. They probably go home on Christmas or special days to see their parents. They make calls on phone. So they are not subject to that clientelistic relationship. They are not bound to the principal who brings them out. And those are the ones who say, you know what, we want to make a change. Now, in that voter category, many of them already made up their mind that they're going to vote for whatever they think captures their rage for the moment. And that's where the obedient movement started its foundation with the NSAS people to made up of, look at the demographics, usually computer literate guys who work in IT, guys who are self-employed professionals who have the capacity to sit back and assess the causes of the crisis they are facing. Their mothers at home face this crisis. They know that they used to buy rice, maybe a bag of rice for 13,000, 20,000. They're buying 40. They used to know that they buy granite, a bottle of granite for 300 naira. Now it's 1,200 naira. They know those things, but they're not able to relate this siege, economic siege they are suffering, to clear policies and clear political issues around party, individuals, and character. But these are children who are now emancipated, have that capability. So they make up their mind. There are still a few, like Prof said, who are still decided, who are trying to decide where to go to. But I think that the undecided voters in this country are probably more or less than what we are projecting. What we are doing is that some of these persons are not visible to us in terms of the analytics we are using. Look at the THISDAY projection. So you look at things like party structure, ability to mobilize. These people are not visible. Again, let's come to another issue, the Tom Bradley effect. We had in 1982 LA mayor's race where Tom Bradley, a black man, was on the polls going to win. Then some white voters hid their preferences, lied about their preferences,
Amadi,
and he lost dramatically.
Dr. Amadi.
And that has built into the idea that some of these may be false, unstated, or invisible and illegible.
Dr. Amadi, well, thank you very much. We already ran out of time, but I like your reference to to Chief Amadi. Will it be right to address you henceforth as Dr. Chief Amadi? Are you Ogbuefi or Nze?
No, Dr. Amadi, no professor, no chief, no sir, no honorable.
Anyway, thank you very much. And thank you also, Professor Anthony Kila, for joining us on The Morning Show.